My name is Corbin and I'm the head strength coach for Allegiant South Bay. This is going to be our Block 10, Ask Me Anything. First question for this Block's AMA is, what are some strategies we can implement to continue progressing in the gym while we're in a caloric deficit? This question comes from somebody who is obviously trying to lose weight because they have chosen to be in a caloric deficit. First and foremost, I'd say that the biggest key to one, losing weight, and two, maintaining your performance in the gym and practicing progressive overload over the course of 4 weeks while also being in a caloric deficit would probably be getting enough sleep. We're looking for 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, which probably means that we need to spend even more time in bed trying to get that sleep. And then making sure that that sleep is not only long in duration within those 7 to 9 hours, but also good quality sleep. So making sure that we're not watching screens late at night, making sure that we have a cool, dark place to sleep where we're gonna be comfortable, and making sure we have a nice, consistent bedtime routine as well as consistent go to bed and wake up times. The next thing is probably gonna be hydration. We wanna think about getting half of our body weight in ounces of water per day. And if we're not getting that, in addition to being in a caloric deficit, I can almost guarantee that our performance in the gym is going to drop. So bring a water bottle around with you, measure how much water you're getting, especially in these summer months where we're sweating a lot. That means we need to increase our water intake even more just to maintain performance. And then the last thing I'll say on this question is that depending how big your caloric deficit is, it may be really hard to maintain performance. So what does that mean as far as maintaining performance? If we're comparing this block, so the last time that we did a movement like a trap bar deadlift, if we're comparing what we did this block where we're in a caloric deficit to the last time we did something like a trap bar deadlift when we weren't in a caloric deficit, in measuring our performance based on that, that might not be a good measurement, considering the fact that the last time we did a movement like this or a sets reps tempo scheme like this may not be a good comparison. We probably want to more compare week to week than we want to do to previous blocks. So if we've started this block in a caloric deficit, we hopefully started light enough where we can still progressively overload and get a little bit heavier or faster each week depending on the day of this block, but not necessarily get stronger than we were last time, because last time we may not have been in a caloric deficit. The last thing that I'll say about training in a caloric deficit and trying to maintain your performance is just gut through it. A little mental fortitude never hurt anyone. And that leads me into my next question, where a member asked about weight selection block to block as opposed to week. They said that it's fairly easy to think about progressive overload, starting off really light on week 1 and then progressing into heavier weeks 2, 3, and 4, but managing that block to block, especially with the amount of exercise rotation and variation we have block to block within our program. So Bridge has a really nice feature here where if you click on the exercise, you should be able to see your exercise history. So if we haven't done a movement, if we take block 9, for example, where we did split squat, we only hit that movement as a main primary movement with the barbell about twice a year, we can click on that movement and see what we did for the previous time that we did that exercise. And while the sets reps may be different, it should still give us a good indicator of where to start. And then we don't get to see tempo, but again, it's all we're looking for is a framework. In this particular question, the person talked about overshooting on week 1, and then how do they recapture that progressive overload week to week. So, if we haven't done a particular movement in a while and we feel like we're overshooting it and we're not gonna have, we're gonna be micro-loading is a term that we've come up with week to week, using the change plates to go up like a kilo, 2 kilos each time, then we can always adjust. If set 1 is way too heavy, just go down the next set. Check your ego at the door, use a little bit less weight, let Coach Jim Aware dictate the weight that you're gonna use. But also we can do the same thing if we overshoot on week 1 and we know that at the end of our practice 1, week 1, decrease the weight for practice 2. Again, check your ego at the door. Adding muscle, decreasing fat mass isn't about the weight that's on the bar. It's about time under tension. It's about range of motion. It's about metabolic stress and tissue damage. And we can achieve all of those things regardless of what the weight on the bar is. So while it's a piece of the puzzle, if we're not getting our time under tension, if we're not using good range of motion, or if we're going to be inconsistent with training because we're so sore or we're not able to progressively overload, those are going to be the limiting factors that are going to harm you in your progress, as opposed to just taking a little bit of weight off the bar. My next question is a question about mobility. So this person wants to know if doing the online version of stretch class one time a week, in addition to what they're already doing in the team or strength program, is going to help them reduce the risk of getting hurt in the weight room. In addition to how long some of these improvements in something like mobility or range of motion will take. So answering the first question, stretch is even the online version of stretch is going to be a more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, but it's also not going to take away from team or strength. So I would say one time a week is the minimum. And if you do it 2 times a week, if you do it 3 times a week, it shouldn't hurt your recovery in regards to coming back in for team strength or practice 4. We follow this high-low principle. So we want your high days, your higher threshold workouts to be here at Allegiant. So that's going to be your team strength, practice 1, 2, or 3, and then practice 4. Where stretch would come in is more of a low threshold, where heart rate's not getting super high. It's easy to recover from. If anything, it's going to help you recover in between workouts within those 48 hours between a practice 3 on Monday and a practice 2 on a Wednesday. And then answering the second part of the question on how long it's going to take to see your hard work in stretch pay off is going to depend on how bad your range of motion limitations are. If we are really stiff and have never done any type of isometric training or flexibility, mobility work like cars and pails and rails and the things you're going to get out of stretch class, then it might take a while. And again, more touch points, so doing stretch more times per week throughout the week, kind of intermittently in between your team or strength sessions, will probably help you get from point A to point B faster. But it's not necessary. We're all training to look better, feel better, play better. There's no rush to get from point A to point B. So if you're only getting it in 1 time a week, don't fret. It's way better than what most people are doing everywhere else who don't have access to Allegiant or a stretch class. And it's still going to help you improve range of motion. It'll just take a little bit longer, but it will help you still reduce your reduce your injury risk, especially for things like shoulders and hips and low back. Continuing on to the next question, this person asks if they have some tendonitis in their elbow or their forearm, when is it okay to use something like a wrist strap? This is a nice transition from the previous question, which talked about stretch, where if we're getting pain in the elbow or in the forearm, it probably has more to do with down the chain or up the chain. So in this case, probably the shoulder, right? So if we think about how many degrees of freedom the elbow has compared to the shoulder, the elbow pretty much does one thing, where it flexes and it extends. There's a little bit of a rotation aspect here as we go palm up for supination and palm down for pronation. But in reality, if we don't have enough internal and external rotation at the shoulder or flexion and extension at the shoulder, then we're gonna ask the body to produce that range of motion somewhere else in a joint like the elbow, where it's not built to do a lot of those things, and that's why we end up seeing pain at the elbow. So first and foremost, if we're getting pain at the elbow from something like overuse or into the forearm or wherever, I'd say hitting that stretch class 1 time a week, 2 times a week, as many times as you can fit it in within your work-life schedule in addition to your workouts, the better off you're gonna be in regards to that elbow pain. As well as some self-myofascial release, whether that means getting in there with a hypervolt or a Theragun, some type of percussion instrument, digging into the forearm, digging into the bicep, even up into the tricep, feed some slack to that area, help decrease tension in the elbow will probably be good. And if we don't have access to those tools, even getting to Allegiant 15 minutes before your class, grabbing a lacrosse ball and rolling out on the ground in all those same spots. So thinking tricep, bicep, down into the forearm, feeding as much slack to those joints as possible to help increase the range of motion and decrease tension. From there, as far as using wrist straps go, we can make an argument that increased tension from holding on to the fat grip dumbbells may cause a little bit more inflammation at the elbow. For those of us who are new or unfamiliar with why we are a gym that emphasizes grip strength so heavily, is I'd rather have, if it were doing something like a dumbbell RDL, I'd rather have your grip go before something like your low back goes, right? One of the biggest injuries that we tend to see, or one of the most chronic sites of pain we see, is low back pain. And if I can limit the amount of weight that you can use based on your grip so that your low back doesn't get hurt, that's a huge win for us when working with general population clients. So by using straps, you basically eliminate that constraint and you put something like your low back at risk. That's why we're such a big proponent of using grip as a limiting factor. Now, if you were to use wrist straps, that would probably help as far as the elbow pain goes, but we're still not getting to the root cause of that problem. So you're not fixing your shoulder range of motion, you're not decreasing tension at the forearm and elbow, in which case when you go to do other things, whether it's an overhead press or a bicep curl, you're probably still gonna get elbow pain because you're probably not gonna use straps on those exercises and you still don't have the prerequisite range of motion that you need in order to perform those exercises. So in short answer, even if you use straps, you're not gonna solve your elbow pain and you're just opening yourself up for some type of other injury down the line. When it comes to the concentric tempo, what is the difference between when you see an X versus when you see the number 1? So as a quick reminder here, we do our tempo with 4 different numbers. The first number is the eccentric, which is usually the lowering motion in a movement. So when you see a 3 is that first number, that's gonna mean the 3 seconds down on a squat or 3 seconds down on a row. The second number is usually a pause, right, either before or after that eccentric. So in the squat, it's usually at the bottom. In a hinge, it's usually at the bottom. In a row, it's usually at the top. In a press, it's usually at the bottom. The third number is the concentric, or the effortful portion of that movement. The raising the weight, the standing up out of the squat, the pressing the bar off your chest, the rowing to your ribs, the pulling your chin up above the bar on a pull-up. Those are all the concentric movements. So that's what this question is talking about, is usually in our programming, you will either see an X or you will see a 1. Every once in a while, you'll see numbers higher than a 1. We had a strength block a few blocks ago that utilized this. It's just less common. So when we use an X, it's usually during an intensification block when the weights are heavier and the sets, there's usually more sets and there's usually less reps per set. So the point here is, because the weights are heavier, we want you to stand up out of that squat as fast as you possibly can. We want you to be explosive. It's a matter of intent. So in this current block, block 10, when we think about front squats and we think about trying to be faster than 1 to 1.3 meters per second, we need to stand up as fast as we can. Those chains are coming up off the ground. They're adding weight to the bar. So using that speed to come up out of our sticking point is going to be a huge emphasis on this block. But even if we've got something like a trap bar deadlift where we're trying to be up around or above 90% of our 1 repetition max, we still need to try and have some intent when we're pulling that bar up off the ground so that we can get through that sticking point. So that's the point of when we put X. Now when we put a 1 in that third number on our tempo, the point of that is just a little bit more of a controlled concentric. So if we think back to last block, block 9, where we're going 12, 10, 8, 12, 10, 8, we don't need to stand up out of that split squat really explosively on rep number 1, right? We can have a little bit more of a controlled tempo on the way up. And then by rep number 12, especially on that second wave, we're probably gonna be pushing as hard as we can, and it's still gonna be a 1 second tempo anyway, right? So it's just a little bit of a differentiation between coming in and training with intent and training with, hey, I need to stand up and push through this as explosively as possible, and then showing a little bit more control in the more higher repetition accumulation blocks. That question blends really nicely into our following question, where this person asks whether it's more important to increase our weight each week this block, or try to maintain our velocity in meters per second. My guess is what this person is referring to is specifically practice 1 in the team block, where we are doing front squat, we have chains on the bar, and we're trying to have a velocity that's 1.0 meters per second to 1.3 meters per second. So any of us who were able to come in and get practice 1 done in this first week now has a gauge for how fast or how hard it is to move the bar that quickly. Now, the majority of our training is done at slower speeds. In the majority of our training, I know we just did 20 by 2 blocks ago, where we were trying to be between 0.5 and 0.75 meters per second. But even that is a little bit of an outlier in comparison to a block like this one. Usually training between that 0.3 and 0.5 meters per second, what is a more max strength or relative strength zone, is a lot of grinding reps, right? We are, like I said earlier, trying to stand up as fast as we can, but to somebody watching on the side, it still looks slow. And with that, we train to be a little bit slower. We train to be really good at grinding through reps, right? So when we ask you to stand up really fast with minimal weight on the bar and with chains and get above 1.0 meters per second, it shouldn't be a huge shocker to you that you're not very good at it, right? It's not something that we do very often. We don't train to be faster. Most of our clients come in and they want to look good, feel good, play good. I mentioned that earlier. And frankly, doing 10 sets of 3 at 1.0 to 1.3 meters per second is probably not going to lead to those things as quickly as training at higher intensities, higher weights, more frequently. Now, what it is going to do is it's going to increase your speed, it's going to increase your force development, and the higher your force development is, the more potential you have to be able to use heavier loads in some of our other training blocks. If you ever watch a really high level power lifter, when they go to squat a world record weight, it never looks slow, right? They do a fair amount of speed work, and that's because they understand that they need to be high power, high force athletes in order to lift that amount of weight. So it is important for us to spend a little bit of time throughout the annual cycle in training some of these other strength qualities, but it doesn't fit into what our goals are for the most part throughout the year. And so we'll spend a little bit of time on it, but not the majority of time on it, in which case it's probably going to be uncomfortable for you, our members, in the first week or two. So some advice I can give to you as far as whether it's more important to stay within the velocity or increase the weight each week. We wouldn't put the velocity up there if we didn't think that that was important, right? We're not prescribing weights to you every single week, but we are prescribing a velocity zone. So try to stick within that velocity zone. And what I think you'll probably see is we get better at being faster, and we get adjusted to trying to move fast and use the chains and things like that. Your velocity is probably going to go up to a point where you can add a little bit of weight, but you need to be comfortable with using some of the smaller change plates in order to do that. Now, if you're in that front rack position and when you're standing up, that bar is popping up off your shoulders, that's an indicator to me that you probably either need to use heavier chains or you need to put some more weight on the bar. So if I'm in like the 0.8 to 0.9 range and I'm standing up as fast as I can and that bar is popping up off my shoulders, my hypothesis here is that if you were to add a little bit of weight to the bar, you're probably not going to see a slower bar speed, but that bar is going to stop popping up off your chest. The reason for that is because you're just not very good at moving fast. So you're kind of capped out already at the velocity you can stand up at, regardless of the weight that you use. But that bar popping up off your shoulders tells me you're probably having to slow down at the top, so the chains really aren't serving their purpose, right? We want you to have to explode out of the bottom so that you can get through your sticking point and have those chains. They'll have the chains slow you down as you get to the areas in that range of motion where you're stronger. And if that bar is coming up off your shoulders, it's not doing a good job of that. So we either need heavier chains or we need to increase the weight on the bar to the point where we're standing up as fast as we can and that bar is not coming up off your shoulders. And there is going to be the tipping point between too much weight, bar speed is going down, and enough weight where we're maybe not capping out at 1.0 meters per second because we're just not that fast yet, but we're consistently getting as close to that as we can at a given weight. And that practice one is definitely with the front squat. Way more about trying to hit that velocity zone than it is trying to increase weight week to week, where I'd be much happier if somebody came in and was really struggling at 40 kilos to hit 1 meter per second, and by week 4 they were at 1.3 meters per second at that same 40 kilos. So my next question talks about why on practice 1 in team we are training a different velocity zone than we are with the deadlift. So in team, quick recap, we are 1 to 1.3 meters per second, very, very fast on the front squat, using chains as a form of accommodating resistance so that when we get mechanical advantage at the top of the squat, we've got a little bit more weight on there. Versus on our practice 3 for our deadlift, we're 90% or above our 1 repetition max, and we're looking to be between 0.3 and 0.5 meters per second. So why is that? What is the difference here? First and foremost, again, we can think back to the 2 blocks ago where we did 20 by 2 with our RDLs, and we wanted to be between that 0.5 and 0.75 meters per second. So in a hinge pattern or a pulling pattern, it's a lot harder to use accommodating resistance, especially when we're doing a deadlift where we're pulling off the floor, right? The chains kind of get in the way, bands are a completely different feeling, and we don't have that eccentric, so the lowering part that we have in the squat, before we have the concentric part when we're standing up. And we're not really training the stretch shortening cycle in the same way in regards to that. So the effective speed work there, other than being kind of light and being a deload, probably isn't as good on a movement like a trap bar deadlift as it is on a squat. And the side effect of that is that if we were to train at a 1.0 to 1.3 meters per second, when you stand up that fast, you're probably more likely to come up on your toes, do a little shrug, maybe even get it so it looks like a clean pull at that point, or even into like a jump shrug that we've done occasionally in the team class as a form of power development or potentiation into that A series. And we really wanted to avoid that movement because it wasn't the intent of our 10 sets of 3 here, right? We didn't want to turn it into a jump shrug. We didn't want to turn it into a clean pull, which we already were starting to see in that 20 by 2 block at 0.5 to 0.75 meters per second. So 10 sets of 3 in a relative strength zone like 0.3 to 0.5. Again, just like I talked about in the last question, if we're only going to train the 1 to 1.3 meters per second, it's probably not going to lead to the body composition changes, either adding muscle mass or decreasing fat mass, that most of our members want to see. So by having a couple practices in there between practice 2, practice 3, maybe even practice 4 if you're attending that, where we're getting some true strength work in and we're actually having some neurological changes, we're getting our heart rate up a little bit more, that's going to be very beneficial for trying to induce some of those body composition changes. So in short, it didn't make a whole lot of sense from a biomechanical standpoint, it didn't make a whole lot of sense from an adaptation standpoint, and it logistically didn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's why we ended up going much heavier on that trap bar deadlift. My next question asks if I can talk or touch a little bit on nutrition, specifically whether or not there's something we should be eating pre and post workout. So this is a really broad question asking me to touch a little bit on nutrition. I could talk a very, very long time about nutrition in general. We have a really great product called Nutrition Blueprint. It's essentially a 12 to 24 week course, depending on how quickly you want to go through it, but you get access to a whole bunch of videos, and each one of those videos is going to leave you with some specific habits to work on over a week or 2 week period. So the idea is you come in, you buy Blueprint, you spend the first week watching module 1 and trying to implement the habits that it leaves you with. And then at the end of that first week, you come in, you have a consult with a coach. That coach is going to get your body weight, body fat, blood pressure, heart rate, all of that good stuff. And then they're going to spend time sitting down and troubleshooting with you what went well, what didn't go well over that module, and hopefully share some ideas that can help improve your execution of those tasks. So again, it's 12 modules. You can split it up 1 per week or 1 every other week. working through, and that's going to give you a lot of in-depth information about things like habits, nutrition, calorie tracking, macro tracking, high-level habits, and supplementation that will help answer this question for you. And you have access actually to the first 4 modules if you go into your Allegiant app. So that'll be all the way over to the right. You click on more. You've got the Blueprint Nutrition Overview. You've got Habit 1, 2, 3, and 4 there just as a member. So we give that to you as a part of your membership. You can start working on those right now. And then if you want more specifically about macros or calories or supplementation or high-level habits, then you can purchase Blueprint. Now, as far as what we should be eating pre and post workout, as far as pre goes, we want to make sure we're hydrated. So I touched on this earlier about in our caloric deficit question, but we want to make sure that we're getting half of our body weight in ounces of water. Again, this isn't a big secret. It's in your Allegiant app as one of the habits that we give you as a part of your membership. So half your body weight in ounces of water. That means that if you're training early at 5:30 or 6:30 in the morning, the first thing you should be doing when you get up is grabbing water and trying to get as much water in as you can before you get to the gym. And then hydrating throughout your session as well. So bring water with you. And then if you wanted to use something like some electrolytes, LMNT, even like a liquid IV, to replace some of those electrolytes that you probably lost while you were sleeping, probably a good idea to do that as well. And as far as food goes, it's really up to you and what you feel good with. If you feel good training fasted, and again, you're coming in, you're waking up, you're hydrating, and you're coming straight to the gym, then all good to do it fasted. No real negative of that there, especially if our goals are body composition oriented in regards to losing fat mass. Now, if you, again, my question earlier on training in a caloric deficit, we could talk about amino acid pool stores not being totally refilled, carbohydrate stores not totally being refilled coming out of training right after a fast during our sleep. But really we're looking at the 1% difference there. And a lot of times people who are used to training first thing in the morning, training fasted before they eat anything, don't feel particularly good if they wake up and have a big meal and then come in to train. So I wouldn't recommend doing that, but if you are on the other side of the spectrum and you want to add muscle mass, I would experiment a little bit. Have something like a banana in the morning before you come in and work out. Maybe we start supplementing with either a protein shake or some type of amino acid, so that we have some of those amino acid pools or carbohydrate stores a little bit more topped off when we come in to train. And that will probably give you a little bit more energy to fuel you through your workout and help lead to more addition of lean muscle mass. But again, I wouldn't make any drastic wholesale changes. I'd experiment, one food item at a time, so that you don't come in and feel awful during your training, because that's gonna hurt you a lot more than adding, one thing is going to benefit you. Now, post-workout, that's when we wanna think about really replacing those carbohydrate stores. In regards to that post-workout window that's kind of bro science-y, it definitely has an effect in regards to carbohydrates. So we can space our protein intake out throughout the day. If I'm 200 pounds and I am looking to get 200 grams of protein in throughout my day, and I'm gonna have 4 meals over the course of my day, I can space that out with 50 in the morning, 50 for lunch, 50 as an afternoon snack, 50 for dinner. Not a big deal. Whereas carbohydrate, I probably want to time that a little bit more around my workout. So it's gonna depend again upon what your goal is. If you want to decrease fat mass, we still wanna think about those carbohydrates being low glycemic index, being a little bit slower in releasing or digesting, and being a little bit more high in fiber. Whereas if our goal is to increase muscle mass, we can afford to have something that's a little bit more high GI and digests a little bit faster, and frankly probably tastes a little bit more better and is fun to eat. But getting that in, within a 30 to 45 minute window post-workout, or even using some type of a carbohydrate shake intra-workout, is probably a good idea. If you want more information on anything I talked about, you should buy Blueprint. And my last question asks whether there will be any accessory or core work added to the workouts since the movement prep period was shortened. So in regards to the team class, that was a big reason why we took some of the movement prep out. We took pails and rails out of the program, was because our team practice was running long. So we've fixed that problem. A second order consequence of that is that potentially our strength program is getting over a little bit faster, and there have been discussions on how we fix that. So number one, we've added some sets into that strength program to make it a little bit longer, and we've also talked about adding specifically probably a little bit more core work into that program. As far as accessories go, it's already kind of in there, right? You've got your A series, that's your main movement for the day, your main 2 movements for the day, and then you go into your B series, which is usually a tricep and a little bit more accessory oriented overall. And if you're talking about things like biceps, triceps, and shoulders, upper back development, a lot of that's in practice 2 in the sculpting. And sculpting is always for you guys. So do as much of it, do as little of it as you want. So if you just want to do the core stuff, just do the core stuff. If you want to do just bis and tris and do 3 sets of it, go for it. If you want to do all 6 exercises, 1 set of each, that's perfectly okay too, but that's there for you guys. Now, again, we will probably end up potentially adding a little bit more of those strength workouts so that they take up the whole 60 minutes. All right, everybody, that is the AMA for block number 10. I appreciate everybody's questions. Make sure you sign up for our beach cleanup later on this month in September, and we'll see you all there. Thanks a lot.